Good day and welcome to today's webinar, Converged Security, Protect Your Digital Enterprise. This webinar is brought to you by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, together with Vivid. I'm your host, my name is Richard Bishop. I'm Head of Service Delivery for Trust IV Limited. We're an HPE partner in the UK specialising in software risk management. I've been a member of the Vivid board for the last 5 years. I'm the UK chapter leader and co-leader of the Software Education Special Interest Group. As well as that, I'm president of the board of Vivid at the moment. I'm here to introduce the speakers, and we've two speakers today. The first of which is Herben Verstraete. He's Chief Technologist in Software Services at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. He's a lead architect within their HPE Software and Solutions Federal CTO office, which I'm sure looks huge on his business card. In this role, Herben defines implementation strategies for US federal agencies, state and local government, as well as Fortune 100 customers. So he sounds pretty busy. He's responsible for the go-to-market services strategies for HPE Software Services and the solution portfolio. This includes data center transformation, enterprise architecture, as well as cloud computing strategies. When he isn't strategizing, Herben leads critical client engagements, acting in CIO and VP of IT strategic advisory roles. Alongside Herben, we have John Kindervag, today's guest speaker. He's Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester. And in his role, he serves security and risk professionals. He's a leading expert on wireless security, network security, security information management, and PCI data security, and has more than 25 years of high-tech experience. He's best known for creating the highly influential Zero Trust model of information security, which we'll hear about later. He currently advises both public and private sector organizations in the design and building of Zero Trust networks. He holds or has held numerous industry certifications, including QSA, CISSP, CEH, and CCNA. John has a practitioner background, having served as a security consultant, penetration tester, and security architect before joining Forrester. He has particular expertise in the areas of secure network design, wireless security, and voice over IP hacking. He's been interviewed and published in numerous publications, including the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and the New York Times. He's appeared on television networks such as CNBC, Fox News, PBS, and Bloomberg, discussing information security topics. John has spoken at many security conferences and events, including RSA, SXSW, TourCon, not quite sure I pronounced that correctly, InfoSec Europe, and InfoSec World. He has a BA degree in communications from the University of Iowa. So before we start the webinar, some housekeeping. As in all Vivid webinars, this live session is being recorded, and recordings are available to all Vivid members from our website. As well as that, the slide deck and webinar recording will be made available to all of you who are attending today. We'll send you the link via email once that's been posted to the Vivid website. If you have any questions as we go along, please type them in using the questions pane in the webinar control panel, and we'll answer those at the end of the session. The webinar control panel normally appears in the upper right-hand corner of your PC screen. So if you want to submit a question, make sure you've expanded the questions pane, type in a question, and click send. So the housekeeping's done, let's get started. As you can see on the screen, today's webinar title is Converged Security, Protect Your Digital Enterprise. And as I said earlier, it's brought to you by HPE Software Services. So before I hand over to Herben and John, I'm going to ask a polling question to help our speakers to understand their audience. Okay, so you can see the first polling question. It's what is your current role? And we're trying to gauge how many people are in each of the different categories on there. So the first category is IT operations, second, security operations, third, application development. Fourth, if you're an external consultant. And then the ubiquitous other, if you can't quite make your mind up. Okay, around half of you have voted so far. We have a clear favourite emerging as well, as far as I can tell. Okay, so the majority of you have voted now. We should be able to see those results. Okay, John and Herman, that will hopefully give you some idea of the sort of audience that you're speaking to. So now the results are in, I'll hand over to John. So, John, you've been observing and covering the security domain for a while. If you only had a few minutes of the CISO's time, what would you tell them?
Well, I'd talk to them about the zero trust model and why trust is an issue, right? So if you look at our ideas of trust, the idea of trust but verify is the problem, not the solution. And so we created the zero trust model to eliminate trust, because trust leads to a tremendous number of breaches. It led to the Manning breach, led to the Snowden breach, it led to the recent highly publicized breach of a Bitcoin provider. So I would tell them to get rid of trust, give visibility. And so the next slide will kind of show you what we're talking about here. So in the world of security, the world of actually devices, right? We always thought about there being a trusted side of our environment and an untrusted side. And so the untrusted port of a firewall, for example, always went to the internet. But we've exposed all the secrets on the trust side for so long that this trust model is the thing that's broken. Next slide. So we created zero trust to eliminate the idea of trust in a network. There's no trust flag in TCP, so you don't need trust to move a packet between point A and point B. And if we eliminate the idea of trust, we have solved some significant problems. So we're going to treat each packet exactly alike. We're going to eliminate the idea of trusted interfaces, trusted networks, trusted applications, trusted users. We're going to eliminate that whole thing. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't trustworthy. I'm saying something much more profound. I'm saying that people are not packets, and packets are the only thing that goes across the network. So we must understand that. Next slide. So this is zero trust, right? It is what the Secret Service does with the president. They need to understand who the president is, where the president is, and who has access to the president. And so this is a model where we eliminate this broken trust model, and we get rid of the idea that we need trust in our network. And in your environment, the president is going to be the data that you protect. And so zero trust is also a data-centric model of network security. And that's the thing that makes it take off so huge around the world, and it's the thing that's transforming security. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it back over to Herman here, but that's what I would talk about is zero trust and why that concept leads to so many good things in your IT and security environments. So thanks.
Thanks for that, John. It was a great introduction and a good analogy with the picture of Air Force One. Okay, so moving on from that, over to you, Herman. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing in the market?
So can you hear me now? Sorry, I was on mute. There's a couple of challenges, right? And I just want to mention three main challenges that I see. One is really when you start taking a look at the spend of security, we're still following, quite somewhat an old-fashioned model, right? As John mentioned, zero trust, it's sitting everywhere. Yet we see a lot of organizations still focusing on the traditional over 50%, right, on network security and data security, really, protecting, the firewalls, the data, and yeah, absolutely, you have to follow the data, but really we have moved, over the past years, to a total different model, right? Where people are working from anywhere, data and applications are living anywhere. People have their mobile devices, bring your own devices, and these type of things. So you need to come with a different approach. The adversary has moved on, right? They don't do traditional network hacking anymore. They've moved on really to the application layer and to the users, and do reconnaissance in a much smarter way in order to get the data out that they're seeking for, or to do damage, right? The second one is really the ignorance of application security. You see some of these numbers, that are done out of the cybercrime study, and these numbers are quite staggering, right? Specifically, also when you start looking at mobile devices, the mobile devices alone, the applications, the amount of applications that are not secure is just staggering, right? In the application world, we also see quite often that security is an afterthought, and we're testing just before it needs to go into production, with all type of consequences, because no one is going to say, hey, let's delay this application with another two months because we have to rewrite code. Because it has another business impact. So the business ends up taking the risk and deploying the application, because they don't want to lose revenue from a time to market perspective. So these are all the type of things that we need to start thinking of. And the third one is really, and it goes a little bit back to the previous ones, is IT security has traditionally been a silo, right? Really taking a look at everything from a pure security perspective on the operations side, and that's where I grew up, right? And then later evolved into operations. We have actually quite a bit of capabilities that and information sources that can and should be leveraged by security. I will talk about some of those later. But for instance, IT security is like lack of visibility. If an event happens, what does it mean? What's the impact? Give me some additional information, right? And how can I actually automate it to remediate and take away, the security threat and these type of things. Security has been very reluctant when it comes to automation, simply because they don't have visibility. They don't know what they're going to break. Yet a lot of the information sources are available in operations, right? Everybody, or most people on the phone are, for instance, familiar with ITIL, configuration management, and these type of things, right? So, and the other thing is when you start looking at things like change management, incident management. Either security has its own incident management system for very good reasons, or start looking at things like change management. I've seen quite often with customers, and you're asking who from security is there, and then nobody's there, right? So we really need to find a better way of working together. Back to you.
Thank you. That sounds interesting. So the fact that people are siloed makes things a little bit difficult, and the fact that risk specialists are averse to risk, so they're reluctant to test sometimes. So that's interesting. What we'll have now is a polling question where you've obviously described some of your concerns, and hopefully our audience can describe some of their their concerns or their security concerns. We have a choice of 5 this time. The first one is securing applications, so secure code and runtime protection. Second one, real-time visibility into the compliance state of the IT environment. The third, speed and effort involved in compliance remediation, so patching, for example. The fourth is the ability to identify and track slow-moving threats. And the fifth, a lack of coordination between security, operations, and applications. And in view of our first poll, where we saw that the majority of people were either IT ops based or external consultants, it'll be interesting to see how that sways our results. Okay, almost half have voted. It's quite difficult to pick one of these 5 because it's like one of those questions where probably 3 of them are your top 3. Okay, we seem to have 2 front runners, so I think we can close that there. And Herben, for your benefit, I'll just read out the poll results. So the top one with 36% is securing applications. The next one with 27% is a lack of coordination between security, operations, and so on. And then third equal, real-time visibility into compliance and the ability to identify and track slow-moving threats. One of the things that I know we're aware of is that a big trend in IT at the moment is DevOps. Herben, can you give us an insight into how DevOps might impact the zero trust model that we heard about earlier, and how it might relate to what you've been seeing?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, right? So within DevOps, it's actually bringing things to even a more extreme, right? So DevOps is really all about speed of getting applications released much faster, and it's really driving automation, to the extreme. Which means, hey, I got less time for testing, although that's not entirely true, but that's how many organizations are looking at it. What that really means is, we can't just look at IT security as an overlay function anymore, right? And we need to start changing and thinking on how we do this different. Really, thinking about, security is everybody's problem, and it should be, embedded throughout the life cycle, right? Which also means things like cultural shift, early on in the development cycle, making sure that developers are aware that it's not just about the code, it's about good code and secure code, right? And giving the ability and the facilities, through processes, through technologies, through automation, early on in the life cycle, that they can actually, embed and instill security. Besides processes, you can introduce things like KPIs and those type of things. So that's really what you're looking for. So from a zero trust model perspective, you're also looking at you need to address that throughout the life cycle, right? And the extreme automation that we're seeing in DevOps just complicates things. Or we have to, once we're making that change, we have to also address, security, which traditional, as you saw from some of the numbers, security has come really late in the life cycle, and that's something that we need to address here.
Okay, so arguably things are a little bit too siloed still. So is this? Can you explain what this means to customers and what they should do and how you can help them do it?
Yeah, so we are seeing these challenges, right? And even from our perspective, right, we're taking a look at our customers and how they are using our portfolio as well as third-party portfolios, and need to start bringing these things really together, right? From for instance, in our space, with the HP Hewlett Packard Enterprise, we have our ITOM product, we have our DevOps products, and then we have our security products. And traditional, you also taking a look, looking at, these are different buyers and different stakeholders. Now that bridge needs to be gapped. So we need to really build that bridge and starting to reach out, across the aisle. And so one of the things that Converged Security is all about is, we have in this particular case, 5 type of use cases where we say, okay, we need to start bridging these gaps between security practices, operations practices, and development practices, right? And very somewhat tactical, if you may. What you see here is those 5 areas. So let me go through them real quick. So the first one is what I call secure asset lifecycle management, right? And this is really all about knowing what you have, always knowing what you have. I mean, everybody's doing scans, right? Security is doing their own scans. They're looking for CVEs and compliance and those type of things. Operations is doing their scans, but they're doing it from sometimes compliance, right? But compliance from a different perspective. But it's really about from a focus from a service availability perspective, right? What is my service built out of? What is the relationships between my applications, my nodes, my all my different devices, and what makes up the service, right? So in the case if an event happens, right, I actually know what the business impact is. When I walk into most SOCs today, so security operations centers, I see some of the information is missing. And walking into a SOC quite often is like going back in time, 10 years, 15 years back in time, walking into a NOC, right, where the screens are red. So providing that information, that additional information that actually already exists somewhere else in the organization, can actually help security to prioritize the amount of events in a better fashion by relating it back to the business. Quite often this is a manual process, yet that information is stored somewhere else and in an other discipline within operations, right? So the other one is, and I mentioned this already a little bit, is the augmented cyber operations, and that's really making sure that we are part of the operational processes, doing them jointly, sharing information, right? So there's no reason to, for instance, to invest in a separate incident management system, right? So people typically say, hey, my data needs to be, I cannot have other people read my records, right? So there's ways of doing that, but think about things like release management. Release management, change management. Really need to make sure that we're starting to share better information, so it doesn't become an afterthought, and security is being thought as such. The other one, and this really goes to the DevOps cycle of the house, is the secure application lifecycle management, right? So really making sure that we don't test just before something is going into production, right? As part of the last test cycle, but that we're changing the culture, that we're changing the processes, we're changing the automations, right? In the DevOps world, that we have security embedded into the design, so the design of the application, the design of the infrastructure that we would choose, right, in the cloud when applications moving to a cloud. And based on the profile of the application, data classification, these type of things, we actually want to have these decisions being made in an automated fashion for us, right? So don't leave it up to the people that have to actually deploy it. And then automation and remediation. So if you know what you have and you know what the impact is, right, you can actually start thinking about automating my security events, right? I will not say you should automate all type of events, but those events that you see, that you know what's being impacted, where you know that you can actually take some automated action. There are significant savings there, right? So if you take a look at today's world, and this is not even that black and white, but most SOCs, the way they operate is an event happens and there's a manual investigation that's going to happen. Many of these events we can actually already start doing automation, right? And that's by putting better policies in place, right? Thinking about things like compliance. I've seen customers that just doing, rootless compliance, right? There's no reason why certain devices, specifically in a highly standardized environment, are out of compliance. So compliance enforcement, some of these organizations are actually taking the strategy and say, there's a zero tolerance there. Now there will always be exceptions in these type of things, but automating that compliance, automating the remediation is another thing that I see where organizations are moving to. And lastly, it's all about the data, right? So we're looking today at log files, at events and these type of things. One of the things that we don't look at is, for instance, how can we start looking at, events that happens also in operations, right? For instance, from a performance and availability perspective, and starting to correlate those, right? Where's traffic coming from, and doing, all type of security analytics on the data. Really, when I start talking about, secure by design, and the slide you see here actually shows is coming from IT for IT, right? And IT for IT is something that Hewlett Packard Enterprise assisted with, and is now an open standard by the Open Group. And you can actually look for it on the web and download the papers and the material. But it's all about, when you start looking at the life cycle, right? It starts with strategy to portfolio. So what's my portfolio? What does it need to look like? How am I going to build my applications? How am I going to build my systems that my applications need to be run on, right? And quite often these are standardized environments, but standardized environments based upon certain classifications. How do I actually request it, and how do I finally remediate and putting my things into compliance? So really it's about secure design, secure, right? And that needs to happen from the beginning. Traditional, in most organizations you see that the CISO is on the strategy and portfolio side, right? And that's where we're starting to set policies, and then we don't see security quite often or not enough in requirement to deploy and request to fulfill, but all of a sudden we're seeing the SOC back into the detect to correct cycle, right? So we really need to start thinking about how do we shift these things back and putting security throughout the entire life cycle. Back to you, Richard.
Sorry, that's great. I was just struggling to take my phone off mute, so sorry about that. Yeah, thanks very much for that. It's a good discussion about that. So we've got a polling question now, and that may well help us understand which of those pillars that you've introduced are of most interest to our audience. So as I've just mentioned, Herben introduced those pillars of Converged Security, and it would be good if you could let us know from which use case that described earlier you see the most potential benefits. But if you could click, this is one where you can choose multiple options. So we're looking at secure application lifecycle management, security compliance and automated remediation, augmented cyber operations, security analytics, and security asset lifecycle management. So if you could pick those where you see the most potential benefit. Okay, I think we've got our votes in now. And Herben, we've got 40% there who've chosen secure application lifecycle management, and 40% have chosen security analytics, and then 20% security compliance and automated remediation, and nobody has chosen augmented cyber operations or asset lifecycle management. Okay, so moving on from that, John, I know that Herben approached you on the subject of converged security and asked you to survey the market. Can you take us through the results of that research?
Yeah, absolutely. We did some custom research for HPE around converged security, and so you know, when you think about all of these kinds of things, whether it's the closely related converged security to zero trust and all the ways we need to do about things, we need to understand that the way we've been doing it up until now has not been working, so we better come up with some new ways of doing things. And bringing everything together, converging it in multiple different ways, whether it's at a platform, at a business level, at a thought level, are really, really important. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'll show you some of the information that we got regarding this. So if we look at the security initiatives, right, and what are the things that are really, really important for companies coming up over the course of the next year, you can see that that there's some interesting things. The first one is addressing existing threats and vulnerabilities. Now, this is a little bit of an old school thing because a lot of times there's not a lot of context around the threats and vulnerabilities that they need to protect. So that's going to be one of the big things that people need to understand is the context of those threats and vulnerabilities. And then we have threat intelligence capabilities, which start to give you some of that internal context, improving mobile security, leveraging cloud-based security. You can see all the things here. One of the things I did want to point out is adopting a data-centric approach to security. That's going to be ultimately really, really important because the context is the data. You know, what did Manning steal? A bunch of information on SIPRNet. What did, which was data, right? Snowden stole a bunch of documents and PowerPoints and all that kind of stuff. Again, data. And then at this recent Bitcoin hack, what did they steal? Bitcoins. Bitcoins are essentially data. So it was the lack of understanding the thing that you're protecting that I think is the key thing that we're going to have to focus on probably for the rest of our careers in this business, because threats and vulnerabilities, threat intelligence, they're important, but we better know what is being threatened. Next slide. And so when we ask the question, could converged security enhance your existing security in your world, right? What is going to be the value? Everybody seems to understand that, and that's really, really important, that 83% of the people that we polled, and this is a statistically significant poll, and we're one of the largest polling organizations in the world. People don't know that, but we do a tremendous number of survey, and we field the second longest running survey in the U.S. behind the U.S. Census Bureau. So this is really important, and it shows some really significant trends. But people want to converge everything. They've got too many things to manage, too many devices, it's too complex, and that's why it will enhance their existing security. Next slide. And so when we look at the benefits of it, right here in Figure 5, what is the potential benefit of converged security practices? Well, security analytics, and security analytics is visibility. One of the things that we saw in there, people were saying, well, I want to secure my applications, this thing, that thing, and the polling question we did here, you have to have visibility if you're going to do security. That actually is the first step, and the tooling that you use to do that is security analytics. And then because of that, we can do secure applications. We can then, that will flow into compliance. Compliance has to be built into all of those things. We'll have the asset lifecycle management. We'll have better cyber security operations, and we'll move towards a declarative rules of security approach. And this is something that we're working on at Forrester. We need the business to align with security and IT, and the way they'll do that is they'll declare the security state moving forward. And then from there, we can do some really unique things around this. We can reduce the risk of what's going on here in Figure 6. We can see that risk can be changed. We can increase productivity. We can increase compliance. We can mitigate threats and incidents before they become breaches. We can lower costs, and we can reduce the time to remediate. And you can see various people have put these and stack rank them in terms of importance, right? But they all flow down from each other. That's what's very cool about this idea of converged security. As you converge it, all these benefits happen, even sometimes without you trying to make them happen. So cost reduction is a great benefit. The lack of complexity, or reducing the amount of complexity, decreases risk. It makes things move faster. You know, if you think of what does DevOps really mean to security people, it means go faster, go faster, go faster. How can we become agile? How can we become fast in order to meet the business needs and the way apps are being developed? All those things are going to be important as we converge our security practices and become more centralized. Next slide.
That's great, thank you. I think we're moving towards the summary now. So if we wrap up with Herben going through this slide, and then we'll move on to Q&A. We have a few questions that have come in, and I can see immediately some are more appropriate to one or the other of you. So I'll hand those over to you after Herben.
Yeah, so in summary, and thank you, John, thank you, Richard. Really looking at a couple of things that we take away here, right? There's a zero trust, and we really need to take an approach from a zero trust type model, right? Trusting environments is over, and it's all about really following the data and getting a more data-centric approach. At the same time, we have to evolve, right, to where we're starting sharing information, getting out of the silo type of mentality, the old school approach, where we're focusing just still too heavy on what I would call the traditional, firewall, the fortress. The fortress is gone; it doesn't exist anymore. And the adversaries are just evolving and getting more creative, right? We all know about some of the real cases around ransomware, right? Just for example. So we need to start taking a different approach, starting to integrate things, getting smarter, but also making sure. And the only way when we start sharing information and getting smarter is how we can increase our velocity, for instance, of application releases when we're embracing something like a DevOps, right? So from a converged security perspective, we actually take a use case oriented approach, right? So for instance, in the DevOps world, right, we have, for instance, use cases where we're really embracing, bringing all the disciplines together, but also it's also about people, right, and creating the awareness, because, as I said earlier, we need to start thinking about security by design, and security by design is everybody's problem, and not just the problem of those who are setting security policies and running security. It's ours, it's mine, it's yours, it's everyone's. So with that, Richard, I think we have time for some questions.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I'll start off with the first one that came in. It's where do I start assuming a zero trust model? I'm guessing that may well be one for John, since that's his specialist subject.
Yeah, I mean, where do you begin? You begin, first of all, you just get rid of this idea of trust. So there's a mental shift that you have to do where you quit thinking about things as being trusted and untrusted. That's really where you start, because once that clarity comes in, then you'll understand intuitively how to solve a lot of these business problems, but you're inhibited by these human ideas of trust that don't translate into the digital world very well. And once you do that, I was doing a Zero Trust workshop up in Canada last week, and after we'd gone through, one of the people just said to me, wow, this is really obvious, but the fact that it is obvious wasn't perceivable because of the preconceived notions that you go into it. So go into it thinking that now's the time to make a change and start changing the trust model.
And going with your eyes open and no preconceived opinions by the sound of it.
Absolutely, okay. Yeah.
Herben,
don't let the past inhibit the future. That's really what we see happening.
Good advice, thank you. Herben, I think the next question might be better for you because it says you mentioned the 5 domains of converged security. Is there a low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, from having going around the globe and visiting many customers, I think there's a couple of low-hanging fruits. I still see, and this is probably the easiest one, is many SOCs are still, doing a lot of manual work, figuring out how to prioritize the overload of security events and being able to prioritize them. Right, we all know the target use case, and target, for instance, out of the research, it appears the event was ignored. I question that. Yes, the event was ignored, but it's also by the overwhelming amount of events and not having the ability to prioritize a security event against the true business impact. Right, so starting to integrate disciplines like configuration management, where that in operations we're using, have been using for years now, and really understanding the business impact. That's something that is missing, and I think is one of the low-hanging fruits. The other one is, if people starting to go on a DevOps journey, right, take that opportunity to change the mentality of the organization. Those are just 2 examples, but it's really making sure that we're starting to embed things. Right, so those are some of the things I would start with, and then clearly, analytics is another one. It's not really low-hanging fruit, but it's something that we need to start getting our arms around.
That's great, thank you. There's another question as well, which I'm not sure who could handle this best, but someone's asked, we are in the middle of transforming to DevOps. How do you recommend we build security in? Is that for you, Herben, or?
Yeah, I can take that. So and then John, I'm sure John has some opinions on this as well. So the journey of DevOps is really a transformation journey, right? You can't just automate your development processes and the test processes, and then thinking everything when you move it into operations is honky-dory, right? We need to really start looking at roles and responsibilities. The automation is always easy, but there's a consequence. And putting in the disciplines, changing the organization, changing the awareness. For instance, on the development side, that we can start doing security, tests and scans early on, and capture. And mitigate security issues early on in the life cycle is definitely something you need to start looking at and changing that mentality. I mean, too many organizations are as I said earlier, are testing too late, right? And only then you start thinking about the automation aspects. So it's a triangle, right? It's a balanced approach you need to take, but just automating everything to the extreme, what you have today is not DevOps. It's the people, it's the processes, and people awareness. 9 out of 10 times that's the downfall. Or the
so it's about not getting hung up on tools and doing more sooner.
Yep.
To summarize. John, do you have anything to add to that? How would you recommend building security into DevOps?
Well, I think you have to change some incentives too. One top DevOps guy said to me, hey, app dev doesn't care about security. And while there's a lot of talk about security, when you get down to it, a lot of times there isn't the correct incentives to care about security in the right ways. It's not just about, a basic source code review or something like that. It's much more involved in that. So it's about caring about security. It's about integrating what you're doing with other parts of the IT world. It's about communicating and not pointing fingers. So there's some real challenges that have to be both confronted and solved moving forward. And a lot of that relates to the various incentive structures that exist within most organizations as it relates to DevOps versus enterprise architecture versus security versus infrastructure and operations. All those things have to converge. Just like we're talking about converging security and technology, we have to converge incentives and goals and plans and make each part of the organization care about what's going on in the other parts of the organization.
That's great, thank you. So it's about breaking down silos and people and processes rather than just thinking about tools. It's about changing people's mindsets. Thank you. Okay, so I think we can probably wrap it up there. No more questions have come in whilst we've been talking at the end. So if we move to the next slide, there's a URL there that will also be available on the Vivit website. And if you want to find out more about Converged Security, you can visit hpe.com/software/Converged Security. So it only remains for me to thank everybody for attending. As we've said before, these slides will be available online, so if you know a colleague who you think would benefit from this, point them to our website and they'll be able to get access to this information. Got a couple of things to say in wrap-up. A few weeks from now, HP Discover will be running in Las Vegas, so if you're looking for an excuse to go to Las Vegas, you won't get a better one than this. In answering the question why attend, well, you get the opportunity to see HPE's solutions firsthand and get hands-on with those, as well as speak to HPE execs and as well as R&D people and all of their specialists, so you can learn a great deal from it. It's a good place to meet your peers and thought leaders from the IT industry. And regardless of your software interest, there's lots to see. I go and I find it hard to pick sessions because there's usually 2 or 3 that I want to go to all at the same time, but it's well worth it, and I'd recommend attending. The link at the bottom of that slide, if you click on that link or follow that link, you'll be able to go to the booking site and you'll get a $300 discount on the cost of registering to attend. So thank you very much for attending. On the final slide, it just reminds me to say, if you could complete the short survey at the end of the webinar, we'd love to hear from you. And if you opt in for more information from HPE, we'll keep you informed about events such as this and the future direction of IT, particularly with new topics such as converged security and other game-changing aspects of IT. So stay in touch, and thank you very much for attending.